The sky was bleeding red when Kale Vorsh first realized he'd made a deal with the devil. Not the horned kind from old Earth tales, mind you, but something far worse. Humanity itself. He stood on the jagged cliffs of Zera 9, a backwater planet so far from the galactic core it didn't even have a proper name until the humans showed up and started carving their messy fingerprints into its crust. The wind howled, tugging at his tattered coat, and below him the ocean churned black and furious, as if it knew what he'd done, what he'd asked for. It started 6 months ago, back when Kyle was just another nobody in the sprawl of the Outer Rim. A scavenger, a drifter, a gray-skinned Zainari with too many scars and not enough credits to keep his ship's engines humming. The humans had rolled into port like they owned it, loud, brash, and spilling out of their patched-up freighters with grins that promised trouble. Kyle hated them on sight. Everyone did. They were the galaxy's cockroaches, adaptable, relentless, and impossible to kill off no matter how many wars or plagues the universe threw at them. But they had something no one else did: numbers and guts, and a knack for turning scraps into miracles. He'd been desperate that day, though. His sister, Lyra, was dying. Some rot from a bad salvage run had crept into her lungs, and the med drones couldn't fix her without a rare isotope that cost more than Kale could scrape together in 10 lifetimes. So when the human captain, some wiry bastard named Decker with a crooked nose and a laugh like a broken engine, offered him a deal, Kyle didn't hesitate. "Save her," he'd said, voice cracking. "I don't care how. Just save her and I'll owe you one." Decker's grin had widened. "Careful what you wish for, friend. Humanity's favors come with teeth." Kale didn't care about the teeth then. He cared about Lyra's shallow breaths, the way her 6-fingered hands twitched against the cot. The humans delivered. They raided some pirate stash, cracked open a derelict station, and came back with the isotope like it was nothing. Lyra lived. Kyle wept, and Decker just clapped him on the shoulder and said, "We'll call you when we need you." 6 months later, that call came. And now here he was, on Zera 9, staring down a nightmare he couldn't unsee. The humans had built something. Not a city, not a ship, but a machine. It sprawled across the valley below the cliffs, a grotesque tangle of metal and pulsing lights that looked alive in all the wrong ways. Towers stabbed into the sky, spitting sparks and smoke, while tendrils of wire and alloy snaked across the ground like veins. Kyle's sharp Zainari eyes picked out the details. Human workers scrambling over it like ants, their shouts carrying faintly on the wind. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it was wrong. The air tasted sour, and his gut twisted with a dread he couldn't name. Decker was waiting for him at the edge of the cliff, leaning against a rusted skiff with that same damn grin. "You're late," he said, tossing Kyle a canteen of something that smelled like fuel and regret. "Thought you'd skip out on us." "What is that thing?" Kyle rasped, ignoring the canteen. His voice was rough from disuse. He hadn't spoken to anyone since Lyra recovered and told him to stop hovering. Decker's grin faltered, just for a second. "That's the favor, friend. The impossible. You're gonna help us turn it on." Kyle's blood went cold. "Turn it on? What does it do?" "Changes everything," Decker said, his eyes glinting with something manic. "We found a signal, see? Old. Older than your kind, older than mine. Buried in the bones of this rock. Took us years to dig it up, decades to build this beast. It's a gate, Kale. A gate to somewhere else." "Somewhere else?" Kale's mind reeled. The humans were insane. Everyone knew that. But this? This was beyond madness. "You don't even know where it goes?" "Nope," Decker said, popping the word like it was a joke. "But we're going anyway, and you're coming with us." Kyle took a step back, his boots crunching on loose gravel. I didn't sign up for this. I owed you a favor, not my life. Decker's laugh was sharp and ugly. You think you get to pick? You said save her, and we did. Now it's our turn. Humanity doesn't do half measures, Vorsh. You're in this whether you like it or not. The wind screamed louder, and down in the valley the machine groaned, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through Kyle's bones. He thought of Lyra, safe back on the rim, breathing easy because of these lunatics. He thought of running, of jumping into the Black Sea and letting it swallow him whole. But Decker's hand was on his shoulder now, firm and unyielding, steering him toward the skiff. "Time to see what we're made of," Decker said. And Kyle realized with a sick lurch that he wasn't just talking about the humans. The skiff rattled as it descended into the valley, its engines coughing like they resented the journey as much as Cale did. He gripped the edge of his seat, claws digging into the worn metal, while Decker hummed a tuneless song beside him. The human's casual swagger was infuriating. Didn't he feel the weight of this? The machine loomed larger with every shuddering drop, its jagged silhouette blotting out the crimson sky. Up close, it was worse than Cale had imagined. The air buzzed with static, and the ground trembled faintly, as if the planet itself was trying to shake off this monstrosity. They landed hard near a cluster of human workers, all sweat-streaked and shouting over the machine's relentless hum. Decker hopped out first, boots kicking up dust, and waved Kyle after him like they were old pals heading to a bar. "Come on, Vorsh. You'll want a front-row seat for this." Kyle didn't move. His eyes were locked on the machine's core. A massive, glowing orb suspended in a web of cables, pulsing like a dying star. It hurt to look at, a deep ache behind his sockets that made him want to claw his own face off. "What's powering it?" he asked, voice barely audible over the noise. Decker glanced back, his grin twitching. "You don't want to know." That was the moment Cale's dread turned to something sharper. Anger. He slid out of the skiff, stalking after Decker with fists clenched. "No more games! You dragged me here! Tell me what I'm part of!" The human stopped, turning to face him fully. For once, the grin was gone, replaced by something harder, colder. "All right then. It's a relic, Coil. Something the galaxy forgot, or tried to. We think it's a jump gate, but not the kind we're used to. Not ships, not cargo. Consciousness. Souls, maybe. Whatever you call it when you strip a mind bare and fling it somewhere else." Cale's stomach lurched. "You're experimenting with minds? And you don't even know where they'll go?" "We've got theories," Decker said, shrugging like it was nothing. "Point is, it's a chance. Humanity's been clawing at the edges of this universe for centuries. Wars, colonies, scraps. We're tired of surviving. This could be ascension, or annihilation. Either way, it's ours." "And me?" Cale snapped. "What am I here for?" Decker's eyes flicked to the orb, then back to Cale. "You're the key, friend. Zynari brains, your neural patterns, they're different. Stable where ours fry. We've lost 6 test runs already. Volunteers, mostly. They come back wrong or not at all. But you might actually make it." The words hit like a punch. Kyle staggered back, his breath catching in his throat. "You're insane. You want to shove me into that thing?" "Not shove," Decker said, stepping closer. "Ask. You owe us, remember? Lyra's alive because we pulled off the impossible. Now it's your turn." Kyle's mind spun. He saw Lyra's face, pale and fragile, then flushed with life again after the humans saved her. He saw the pirate stash they'd raided, the risks they'd taken. And now this. A favor wasn't supposed to be a death sentence. "You lied to me," he hissed. "You knew what you'd ask." Decker didn't flinch. "I told you it'd have teeth." Before Cale could answer, a scream cut through the air. Not human, not Zenari, but something raw and wrong. It came from the machine. The workers froze, tools clattering to the ground, and the orb's glow flared brighter, casting long, twisted shadows. Kyle's skin prickled as a voice, not a sound, but a feeling, slithered into his skull. "Help us," it whispered. "Free us." He stumbled, clutching his head. Decker grabbed his arm, steadying him. "You hear it, don't you?" the human said, excitement bleeding into his voice. "It's waking up, and it knows you're here." Kyle yanked free, his heart hammering. "What's trapped in there?" "No clue," Decker admitted. "But it's been waiting a long time, and it's pissed." The ground shuddered again, harder this time, and cracks splintered through the dirt. The workers shouted, scrambling back as the machine's tendrils twitched like living things. Kyle's instincts screamed at him to run, to get as far from this place as possible, but Decker's grip was back on his shoulder, unyielding. "We're activating it tonight," Decker said, "with or without you. But if you walk away, Lyra's debt stays unpaid. Think about that." Kyle's vision blurred with rage and fear. He thought of Lyra, safe and oblivious, and the humans who'd turned her survival into a noose around his neck. He thought of that voice, pleading and furious, trapped in a machine built by madmen. And he realized, with a sick, sinking clarity, that he was already caught. Whether he stepped into the orb or not, humanity had claimed him. The sky darkened as the machine roared louder, and Kyle knew the impossible was coming for him, one way or another. The air thickened as night fell over Zera 9, the red sky swallowed by a suffocating black. The machine's hum had grown into a pulse, a heartbeat that thrummed through Kyle's chest and rattled his teeth. He stood at the edge of the chaos, watching the humans swarm like insects drawn to a flame. They hauled cables, barked orders, and ignored the cracks splitting the ground beneath their feet. Decker was gone, vanished into the crowd to oversee whatever madness they were about to unleash. But his words lingered like a blade in Kyle's gut. "If you walk away, Lyra's debt stays unpaid." He could still feel the voice from the orb, slithering through his thoughts. "Help us. Free us." It wasn't just a plea anymore. It was a demand, sharp and insistent, clawing at the edges of his sanity. His Zainari senses, honed from years scavenging the rim's dead zones, picked up something the humans couldn't. A dissonance in the air. A wrongness that went beyond the machine's grotesque sprawl. Whatever was trapped inside wasn't just alive. It was aware. And it hated. A hand brushed his arm, startling him. He whirled, claws out, only to find a human woman staring up at him. She was small, wiry, with grease-streaked cheeks, and eyes that looked too old for her face. "You're the Zenari," she said, voice low. "Decker's pet project." Kyle bristled. "I'm no one's pet," she snorted, glancing at the orb. "Could have fooled me. Name's Mara. I'm the one who keeps this heap running, or tries to. You hear it too, don't you? The screaming?" He hesitated, then nodded. "What is it?" Mara's lips thinned. "Don't know. Don't want to. But it's been getting louder since we started digging. Used to be whispers. Now it's like a damn chorus. Decker thinks it's a breakthrough. I think it's a warning." Kyle's gaze flicked to the orb, its glow now a sickly green that pulsed in time with the voice in his head. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're not one of them," she said, jerking her chin at the workers. "You're not drunk on their dreams. Maybe you'll listen when I say we should stop." "Stop?" Kyle laughed, bitter and hollow. "Decker's got me by the throat. I don't get a vote." Mara's eyes darkened. "You don't get it. None of us do. Not really. I've seen the test logs. The ones who went in before you. They didn't just die, Vorsh. They came back wrong. Talking in tongues, clawing at their own skin. One of them begged me to kill him. Said he saw the other side and it was hungry." Kyle's stomach twisted. He wanted to dismiss her, to call it human exaggeration, but the fear in her voice was real. And that voice in his head, it wasn't begging anymore. It was pushing, testing the cracks in his resolve. "You owe them nothing," it hissed. "Break it! Break them!" Before he could respond, a klaxon blared, cutting through the noise. The workers scattered, clearing a path as Decker strode back into view, flanked by two burly humans in patched armor. His grin was back, wider than ever. "Showtime, Vorsh! We're firing her up!" Mara cursed under her breath and slipped away, vanishing into the shadows. Kyle didn't have time to process her warning. Decker was on him, clapping a hand on his back like they were brothers. "Come on, hero. Let's make history." The machine roared, a sound so deep it shook the ground, and the orb flared blindingly bright. Kyle felt it then, a pull like invisible hands dragging at his mind. The voice surged, deafening now. "Free us!" it screamed, and Kyle stumbled, clutching his head as pain lanced through him. Decker laughed, oblivious. "That's it. You're sinking. Get him in there." The armored humans grabbed Kyle, dragging him toward a platform rigged with wires and restraints. He thrashed, claws raking at their suits, but they were stronger, fueled by that reckless human fire. The platform rose, lifting him toward the orb, and the world blurred as the voice drowned out everything else. "You can stop this," it whispered, softer now, insidious. "You can end them." Kyle's vision swam, and he saw Lyra's face, alive, smiling, then Decker's grin, smug and triumphant. The orb loomed closer, its light searing his skin, and he realized with a sick jolt that he wasn't just a key. He was a sacrifice. And the thing inside knew it too. The platform jolted to a stop, suspending Kale inches from the orb's pulsing surface. Its light burned through his closed eyelids, a sickly green that clawed at his senses. The voice was everywhere now, inside his skull, his veins, his bones, screaming, "Free us!" with a fury that made his blood run cold. The restraints bit into his wrists as he thrashed, but the humans below didn't care. Decker's voice crackled through a calm, sharp and gleeful. "Hold steady, Vorsh. You're about to be a legend!" Kyle's claws scraped uselessly against the metal. He wasn't a legend. He was prey. The orb's pull grew stronger, a tidal force yanking at his mind, and he felt himself fraying, threads of thought unraveling into the void. Memories flashed. Lyra's laugh, the rim's dust-choked skies, the day he'd begged the humans for help. He'd traded her life for this, and now they'd turned his debt into a death sentence. Down below, the machine groaned, tendrils twitching as sparks rained from its towers. The workers cheered, oblivious to the cracks widening in the earth. Kyle's sharp Zainari eyes caught Mara in the chaos, her face pale as she wrestled with a control panel, muttering curses. She'd warned him, but it was too late. The voice surged again, softer now, cunning. "They betray you. Break them." He froze. The words weren't just noise. They were a choice. His rage flared hot and jagged at Decker, at humanity, at the trap he'd walked into. The orb pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, and for a moment he saw it. A vision of the machine collapsing, the humans screaming, the valley swallowed in fire. It could happen. He could make it happen. "Vorsh!" Decker's shout snapped him back. "We're at threshold. You're in!" The platform lurched, and the orb's surface rippled like liquid, inches from his face. Kyle's scream caught in his throat as the light swallowed him whole. Pain exploded, sharp, infinite. Then silence. He was nowhere, floating in a black expanse, weightless and alone. No, not alone. Shapes moved in the dark, vague, writhing forms that whispered in 1,000 voices. "You're here," they said. "You're ours." Panic clawed at him, but his body wouldn't respond. He was a mind without a shell, trapped with whatever this machine had caged. The shapes drew closer, their whispers turning to shrieks, and Cale felt them probing, peeling at his thoughts. "Help us," they begged. "End them." He saw Lyra again, safe and alive, and Decker's grin, smug and cruel. The humans had used him, but these things, they wanted more. They wanted out, and he was the door. A jolt ripped through him, and suddenly he was back, gasping on the platform, the orb still blazing. Decker's voice crackled. "It worked! He's linked!" Kyle's hands shook as the restraints loosened. The voices lingered, watching, waiting. Kyle's hands trembled as the restraints fell away, clattering against the platform with a hollow clang. The orb loomed above him, its glow dimmer now, but still alive. Watching. His breath came in ragged gasps, each one tasting of ash and static, and his skin prickled with the memory of that black expanse. The voices hadn't left him. They coiled in his mind like smoke, whispering, pleading, threatening. "You're ours. Free us. End them." He pressed his palms to his temples, trying to force them out, but they clung tighter, their presence a weight he couldn't shake. Below, the valley was a storm of noise and motion. The machine's pulse had steadied, a low thrum that vibrated through the cracked earth, and the humans were shouting, laughing, slapping each other's backs like they'd conquered the stars. Decker's voice boomed over the comm again, sharp and triumphant. "We've got a signal! It's stabilizing! Vorsh, you beautiful bastard, you did it!" Kyle didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a wound, raw and bleeding, his mind split between the here and now and that endless dark where the voices lived. His claws flexed, itching to tear into something. Decker, the machine, himself, anything to stop the chaos clawing at him. He staggered to his feet, legs unsteady, and peered over the platform's edge. The workers swarmed below, their faces lit with a manic glee that turned his stomach. They didn't see it. The way the tendrils twitched, the way the air shimmered with something unseen. They didn't hear the voices, but Mara did. He spotted her near the control rig, her hands frozen on the levers, her eyes locked on him. She'd felt it too, the wrongness, the hunger. Their gazes met, and for a moment he saw it. Fear, yes, but also a flicker of defiance. She shook her head, a tiny, desperate motion, and mouthed one word. "Stop." The platform began to lower, creaking as it descended toward the chaos. Kyle's heart pounded, each beat a hammer against his ribs. The voices surged, louder now, a chorus of rage and despair. "They used you. They'll use us. Break them." He stumbled, catching himself on the railing, and the vision flashed again. The machine in ruins, the valley aflame, the humans screaming. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. Decker was waiting when the platform hit the ground, his grin wide enough to split his face. "You're a miracle, Vorsh. We're reading energy spikes off the charts. Whatever's on the other side, it's waking up." He clapped Coyle's shoulder, oblivious to the way Coyle flinched, the way his claws twitched toward the human's throat. "What's on the other side?" Coyle rasped, voice rough as gravel. "You don't even know." Decker laughed, a sound that grated like broken glass. "That's the fun of it. Could be gods, could be monsters, could be nothing, but it's ours now, humanity's ticket to the big leagues." Kyle's gut twisted. He saw Lyra's face again, alive because of these madmen, and felt the debt like chains. But the voices pressed harder, their whispers turning to snarls. "They'll destroy everything. You can save her. Break it." He glanced at Mara, still at the controls, her hands trembling now. She caught his eye again, and this time she nodded, just once, sharp and certain. She'd do it. She'd shut it down. But the machine was alive, its tendrils curling toward the orb like fingers, and Coyle knew it wouldn't let go easily. Decker turned away, barking orders, and Kyle's hand hovered over the platform's edge. The voices roared, a tidal wave crashing through him. Now, they screamed, and he felt it. The power, the choice. He could end this. He could rip the machine apart, let the voices loose, and watch humanity burn. Or he could fight them, hold the line, and pray the humans were right. The ground shook, a deep rumble that sent workers stumbling. The orb flared, bright and furious, and Kale's vision blurred as the voices clawed deeper. "Free us!" they howled, and he saw it again. Lyra, safe, then gone, swallowed by the fire he could unleash. Mara's voice cut through, faint but fierce. "Vorsh, now!" His claws dug into the metal, tearing grooves. He had seconds, maybe less. The metal groaned under Kyle's claws as he stood frozen, the world narrowing to the scream of the voices and the shuddering earth. "Free us!" they roared, a storm of fury and desperation that drowned out everything else. His vision flickered. Lyra's smile, Decker's grin, the valley in flames, and his body trembled with the weight of it. Mara's shout still echoed in his ears, sharp and urgent. Now, she was at the controls, her hands slamming levers, her face a mask of grim resolve. But the machine wasn't yielding. Its tendrils lashed out, snaking toward her, and the orb pulsed with a light so fierce it burned shadows into the dirt. Kyle's breath hitched. He could feel the voices' hunger, their rage, pressing against his skull like a vice. They weren't just trapped, they were starving, and he was their way out. His claws twitched, itching to tear into the platform, the orb, anything to silence them. But then he saw her, Mara, dodging a tendril as it smashed into the control rig, sparks flying. She wasn't like Decker. She wasn't drunk on humanity's reckless dreams. She was fighting to stop this, and she needed him. The ground bucked again, harder, and a crack split the valley floor, swallowing a worker whole. Screams erupted, the humans' triumph turning to panic as the machine writhed like a living thing. Decker's voice cut through the chaos, furious now. "Vorsh, get back up there! We're losing it!" Kyle's head snapped toward him. Decker stood at the base of a tower, waving wildly, his grin replaced by a snarl. The human didn't see it. The way the orb's light pulsed in time with the voices, the way the air thickened with something ancient and vengeful. He didn't care. To him, Kyle was just a tool, a debt to be cashed in. The voices seized the moment, their whispers turning to a command. "Break it!" they thundered, and Kale's hands moved before he could think, claws slashing at the platform's wiring. Sparks flew, and the machine shrieked, a sound that wasn't metal or tech, but something alive, wounded. The orb dimmed, just for a second, and the voices howled in triumph. "Yes, more!" But then he stopped. His claws hovered, trembling, as Lyra's face flashed again, alive, safe, because of these humans. If he broke it, if he let the voices out, what would happen to her? To the rim? To everything? Mara's cry snapped him back. A tendril had her pinned, coiling around her leg, dragging her toward the orb. She clawed at the ground, her tools scattered, her defiance crumbling into terror. "Vorsh!" she screamed, and the sound cut deeper than the voices ever could. Kyle moved. He leapt from the platform, hitting the ground hard, and charged toward her. The tendrils lashed out, but his Zenari reflexes were sharper, honed by years of survival. He slashed at the metal, severing the coil around Mara's leg, and hauled her free. She gasped, clutching his arm, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and gratitude. "It's not stopping," she rasped, pointing at the orb. "We're too late." The light flared again, brighter, and the voices surged, no longer pleading but commanding. "You can't hold us!" they roared, and Kyle felt it. A shift, a tearing in his mind. The orb cracked, a hairline fracture spidering across its surface, and the air split with a sound like 1,000 breaking bones. Decker was on them in an instant, shoving through the chaos. "What did you do?" he bellowed, grabbing Coyle's coat. "You're ruining it!" Coyle shoved him back, claws bared. "You ruined it! You don't even know what you've woken!" The human's face twisted, rage and desperation warring in his eyes. "We're so close! You owe us this!" "I owe you nothing!" Cale snarled, and for the first time, he believed it. The machine screamed again, louder, and the crack in the orb widened. Something moved inside, dark, vast, and alive. The voices laughed, a sound that chilled Cale's blood. "Too late," they whispered, and the ground began to collapse. The valley was dying. The ground split wider, jagged fissures swallowing dirt and metal as the machine convulsed like a beast in its death throes. The orb's crack yawned open, spilling a darkness that wasn't just shadow. It moved, pulsed, reached. The voices weren't whispers anymore. They were a cacophony, a tidal wave of glee and malice that crashed through Kyle's mind. "Free! Free at last!" They shrieked, and he stumbled, clutching his head as the sound threatened to split him apart. Mara clung to his arm, her breath ragged, her leg bleeding where the tendril had crushed it. "We have to run!" she gasped, pulling at him. "It's over!" But Cale couldn't move. His eyes were locked on the orb, on the thing emerging from it. Formless yet alive, a writhing mass of intent that sucked the light from the air. The humans scattered. Their cheers turned to wails as the tendrils lashed out blindly, smashing bodies and machinery alike. Decker stood his ground, though, screaming into a calm, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Hold the line! We can still control it!" Control it? Cale's laugh was bitter, choked. The humans had never controlled this. They'd poked a sleeping god and called it progress. And he'd been their key, their pawn, dragged into this nightmare because of a favor he couldn't repay. The voices seized his rage, twisting it. They did this. End them! He saw it again. The valley in flames, Decker's smug grin erased, humanity's arrogance reduced to ash, his claws flexed, and for a heartbeat he wanted it, wanted them gone. But then Mara's grip tightened, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Vorsh, don't! You're not them!" Her words hit like a slap, and he blinked, the vision fading. She was right. He wasn't human. He wasn't reckless, wasn't blind. He was Zainari, a survivor, and he wouldn't let these voices turn him into their weapon. Not for revenge. Not for anything. The orb shattered fully then, a deafening crack that sent shards flying. The darkness poured out, coalescing into shapes, vague, towering figures that loomed over the valley. The air grew heavy, suffocating, and the voices roared in triumph. "We are here!" they bellowed, and Kyle felt their gaze, cold, endless, and ravenous, fix on him. Decker charged forward, shoving past fleeing workers, a plasma torch in hand. "Vorsh, get back to the platform! We can seal it!" His eyes were wild, desperate, clinging to a dream that was already dead. Kyle shoved Mara behind him, facing Decker. "It's done, you fool! You've killed us all!" "Not yet!" Decker snarled, lunging at him. Kyle sidestepped, claws slashing, and Decker hit the ground hard, blood welling from his arm. He didn't stay down, though. Humans never did. He staggered up, torch flaring, and swung again. The dark shapes moved closer, their presence a pressure that crushed the breath from Kyle's lungs. The machine's towers buckled, collapsing in showers of sparks, and the ground heaved, throwing them both off balance. Mara screamed as a fissure opened beneath her, and Kyle dove, grabbing her wrist just as she slipped over the edge. Her weight yanked at him, his claws scrabbling for purchase on the crumbling dirt. "Hold on!" he shouted, his voice raw. Her eyes met his, wide and terrified, but she nodded, clinging to him with all she had. Decker loomed over them, torch raised. "You're wasting time, we can still—" A tendril struck, fast and brutal, piercing Decker's chest. His words cut off in a gurgle, his body jerking as the metal coiled and yanked him into the air. Kyle stared, frozen, as the human's torch fell, sizzling in the dust. Decker's eyes locked on his, pleading for a moment, then went dark. The voices laughed, a sound that shook the sky. "One down," they purred. "More to come." Kyle hauled Mara up, his arms burning, and they stumbled back as the dark shapes descended, their forms sharpening. Claws, eyes, hunger made real. The valley was lost, and Kale knew with a sick certainty that this was only the beginning. The valley was a graveyard now, a jagged wound in Zyra 9's crust where the machine had once stood. Its towers were rubble, its tendrils limp and lifeless, but the air still thrummed with the presence of the things that had broken free. They towered over the wreckage, dark, shifting figures with claws like blades, and eyes that burned with a cold, endless hunger. The voices weren't in Kyle's head anymore. They were everywhere, a chorus of triumph and malice that echoed off the cliffs. "We are here," they sang, and the ground trembled with their steps. Kyle dragged Mara through the chaos, his claws digging into her arm as he pulled her over shattered metal and broken earth. Her leg dragged uselessly, blood soaking her pant leg, but she didn't complain, just gritted her teeth and kept moving. The humans who'd survived were fleeing, their bravado shattered, their shouts swallowed by the wind. Decker's body lay somewhere behind them, a crumpled testament to humanity's hubris, and Kale felt no pity. The bastard had gambled with the galaxy and lost. But the victory wasn't Kale's either. The things, the entities, were loose, and they weren't stopping. He could feel their gaze, heavy and predatory, tracking him as he stumbled toward the cliffs. Mara's breath came in shallow gasps, her strength fading, and Kyle's own body screamed with exhaustion. His Zenari endurance was all that kept him upright, but even that was fraying. "We can't outrun them," Mara rasped, her voice barely audible over the entity's low, guttural hum. She pointed with a trembling hand toward the skiff, half buried under debris near the valley's edge. "There, if it still works." Kyle didn't waste breath replying. He hauled her toward it, shoving aside twisted metal with a strength born of desperation. The entities moved closer, their forms solidifying, hulking insect-like shapes with too many limbs and mouths that gaped like wounds. The air grew colder, the light dimmer, as if they devoured everything they touched. The skiff's hatch was dented but intact. Kyle pried it open, his claws screeching against the steel, and shoved Mara inside. She collapsed onto the floor, clutching her leg, while he scrambled to the controls. The console flickered, sparking under his hands, and for a moment he thought it was dead. Then the engines coughed, a weak, stuttering roar, and the skiff lurched upward. The entities lunged, claws raking the hull, and Coyle slammed the throttle. The skiff shot forward, weaving through the valley as the things pursued, their hum rising to a shriek. Mara dragged herself to a seat, her face pale but fierce. "Head for the cliffs," she said. "There's a relay station. Might get a signal out." Kyle nodded, his jaw tight. The skiff rattled, its frame groaning under the strain, but it held. The cliffs loomed ahead, stark against the black sky, and he aimed for a narrow ledge where a rusted antenna jutted out. The entities were gaining, their claws slashing the air, and Kale felt their hunger, a void that wanted to swallow him whole. The skiff hit the ledge hard, skidding to a stop. Kyle leapt out, dragging Mara with him, and stumbled to the relay. It was ancient, half-fried, but its lights blinked faintly. Mara crawled to it, her hands shaking as she punched in a distress code. "Rim's close enough," she muttered. "Someone'll hear." The entities reached the base of the cliffs, their forms towering, unstoppable. Kyle turned to face them, claws bared, knowing it was futile. But then the relay beeped, a sharp, clear sound, and a voice crackled through. "Zinari, not human." "This is Outpost 7. Identify." "Lyra," Kyle whispered, his heart lurching. He grabbed the comm. "Kyle Vorsh, Zinari. 09's gone. Entities loose. Send everything you've got." The line hissed, then, "Hold on." "Fleet's en route." The entities climbed, their claws gouging the rock, and Kale pulled Mara back, shielding her. The skiff was trashed, the valley lost, but the signal was out. Lyra would live. The Rim might stand a chance. The first entity crested the ledge, its eyes locking on Kyle, and the voices spoke one last time, not in his head but aloud, a promise that chilled his blood. "This is not the end." He braced himself, claws ready, as the sky lit up with the distant glow of ships. Humanity had opened the door, but Kale would fight to close it, or die trying.